Hi everyone, we're going to get started. My name is Yuna Her. I'm a senior studying cognitive science and education, and I'm one of this year's Theories in Action coordinators along with Mugodi Mori, who's actually presenting her master's thesis right now, so she won't be here today. But a little about Theories in Action. This is our 9th year right now. It's a way to celebrate and an opportunity for seniors to be able to share their Brown experiences with the rest of the Brown community. So thank you all for showing up. And I'm really happy to introduce this roundtable, Power, Identity, and Borders. And we have 3 amazing speakers ready to share their Brown experiences with you all. Without further ado, can give them a round of applause to get started.
I was about to say good morning, but I think it's good afternoon. And it's really a privilege for me as the chaplain of the university to be here with people who have thought carefully about these topics, and they're going to present to you, and then we'll open the floor for conversation and for their conversation with each other. So Michelle is up first. Yeah.
Hello everybody, my name is Michelle Cruz and I'm a senior, and so our topic is why disrupting the classroom isn't always a bad thing. And so to start off, I want to talk about developing culture responsible curriculum, and so this is kind of something I started to discover or started to do research in my junior year, because I'm in STEM, I study materials chemistry, and I really thought science is inaccessible, not just at Brown, but in general, even in high school. So I really wanted to kind of combine education and science. So I was like, oh, okay, I really want to be more involved in how science curriculum is implemented in schools and how it's created to begin with. So I wanted to start off with this quote where it says, "We must keep in mind that children do not learn in a vacuum. They bring their culture, family experiences, and community experiences with them to school." So a lot of times teachers might not realize that culture is brought with students in the classroom. It's really important to put that in the process of the learning within. And so the first thing that I think teachers should really do when they're in the classroom is get to know your community. Like, take a walk, like whatever school you're in, I think there should be an opportunity for you to just walk, see like the shops, engage in the people in the community, and not just be kind of like a lot of teachers here also live outside of Providence, but I think it's really important to like know the people you are teaching. And it's important because when designing curriculum, there's a term called funds of knowledge, which is basically utilizing the knowledge that students already possess because of their communities, because of their background, because of what their parents taught them. And by getting to know your community, you're already having that in mind when you're developing that science curriculum. And so when you're doing this, you're also utilizing the third space. And this is like educational terms, but the first space is actually all the discourse, all the information you learn in the home. And then the second space is all the information you learn at school, like the tactics, the strategies to solve scientific problems, things like that. And the third space is a space where you combine the knowledge that you obtained from the first space and the second space. And so it's really important to make sure you take away from the home, the family, and that's why it's really important to get to know your community and just utilize what students already know, because it ties into their life and it makes it more relevant. When science becomes more relevant, it becomes more enjoyable to not just the community, but the students, to the teacher, because they want to interact more and engage. And so by utilizing the third space, you transform the power structures by changing the way the space is implemented and adapting it to your students' needs. And then it makes scientific discourse a lot more accessible. And so when developing curriculum in general, a lot of times teachers might think teachers do it in a chronological manner rather than a logical manner. And a lot of times textbooks may be followed verbatim, such as like lesson 1, lesson 2, and it's okay to kind of go outside of the sequence that you're used to. And so it's very important when creating curriculum to make it logical, like history, for example. A lot of times there's a timeline to history, but it's okay to kind of jump around, so it makes it more relevant to your students' experiences, and it makes it more relevant to how they learn in general. And so it's really important to also keep in mind that science in general is an academic language. So especially for English language learners, it could be seen as a third language. Because even for me learning science, it could be really hard when you don't understand some content and everything is just not understandable at all. It's not coherent. So it's not the same as conversational language. And so science in general has content, function, and a structure. And it has the content is words such as photosynthesis. A function word would be a word such as make a hypothesis. It's something that has an action. And then the structure is a sentence structure. So all these three things of science is what makes up the academic language within any science course. And so, for example, when you read the statements such as the mesenchymal component may include cells showing rhabdomyoid differentiation, I don't understand that. Like, I study chemistry, I don't understand that. Like, I don't, I'm sorry. And so you already have these content words like mesenchymal. I don't know if I'm saying this right. I hope I am, because this is not in chemistry, I think this is biology. But mesenchymal, I don't know what that word is. Rhabdomyoid, I don't know what that word is. And they say that if you to understand a sentence completely, you need to understand 90 to 95% of the words, right? But with me not knowing 2 of the words in this sentence, I already don't know. I only know 80% of the sentence or 75%. So I'm already out. And now imagine for English language learners or students that never had access to this kind of words, you're already at loss. And this kind of compounds upon each other when all you're reading is textbook and you're not really being taught the content words. You're not being taught the way the function words also are implemented in a sentence and how to structure a sentence. And a lot of times as a science teacher, you have to act as a language arts teacher because there's so much foundation to understanding content. And so that's why I put at the last sentence, like you have to learn science through language and language through science. Like they go hand in hand. They're they're very inclusive of each other. And so now going from the classroom curriculum to also pedagogy within the classroom, it's very important that pedagogy in general refers to the interactions between teachers, students, and the learning environment. And in the classroom, there needs to be a balance of teaching methods. So for example, there's a lot of authoritative discourse, which is pretty much lecture style. And this tends to be the main kind of method used in the classroom, which it's very easy to do when you're just talking at students, but it's really important to implement different kinds of strategies, such as group dialogue, where the students with themselves are acting as teachers, or where there's dialogue between students and the teachers, or if there's just has to be kind of a flow of knowledge rather than just like one-way interactions. So to keep in mind of the different kinds of interactions that teachers and students can have. And also to have, when you're actually engaging in these teaching methods, to pace the material very well, because there needs to be time for the students to kind of to make this knowledge concrete, because then you compound upon that. And then when you're introducing this material, for science specifically, there's a lot of models and analogies that is used, such as an atom structure. And when you're introducing these models, you have to introduce them as ideas rather than as the definition of these structures, because a lot of times that could lead to misconceptions, which then compound upon each other. For example, an atom, it has the electrons kind of, they're static, they're not moving. But in reality, at the nanomolecular level, they're definitely, we can't pinpoint the location of an electron. So that's already a misconception that's going to be built upon on the students' knowledge as they keep going to advanced chemistry courses. So it's really important when you're introducing models, analogies, to address that they are ideas, to introduce, not as a definition. And so continuing, they're also, in science, people tend to disappear from the science as actors or agents. They tend to be in a passive voice, so it's not very personified. There's no humanization in science. So it's really important to engage in classroom discussion about science in conversational language to begin with, because academic language is so inaccessible and science is so inaccessible and dehumanizing in some ways, that when you incorporate conversational language, especially for ESL learners, you're already introducing concepts in a way that's familiar to them. When you're incorporating their culture, their language, it's something that makes it relevant to them, that makes it enjoyable, and it makes it, in a way, something they want to learn. And so a lot of times, for example, if we're listening in a cafeteria and we're listening to people talking in a different language than us, even though we're listening to it, doesn't mean we're actually acquiring any knowledge from it. So a lot of times students may be in the classroom and there's English being spoken, but a lot of times it just goes through one ear, not the other, because it's all English noise. Just because you hear it a lot doesn't mean you're actually acquiring any information. So that's why it's really important to introduce the the English language learner's actual native language to begin with as a bridge to really engage them in science discourse, because I think that's a great introduction. And then it's really important to repeat this kind of practice, to repeat this kind of method, so that once they get comfortable with speaking also in their native tongue, they can also get comfortable when they start hearing academic language in English. So it's very important to do like a bridge, because if not, there's just never going to be anything. And when you're in the classroom, it's really important to have open-ended questions, because teachers tend to ask questions that they already know the answers to, rather than having it very open-ended so students can contribute their own background and knowledge into the discussion. And so the last thing is to also include parent-guardian involvement and community outreach. And so it's very important to keep in mind that a child's first teacher is their guardian or their parent, and they all have different approaches for helping these students engage in the classroom, or different ways that students in general interact with the world. So it's really important to keep in mind that parents themselves taught their children differently, and they're not just they're not very monolithic. Parents are all different and come from different communities and backgrounds. And parents themselves can be utilized for their expertise, because parents themselves, from regardless of their background, have a lot of knowledge to give to the school, to the classroom, to students, all students. And so parents have this fund of knowledge just as students have these funds of knowledge. And so there should be an importance for collaboration and communication between parents and schools. And an example to increase communication would be to have like a parents' lounge in the school, so then parents feel more welcome to the school, because a lot of times parents may not have a good experience in the education system. And having a lounge that is very welcoming to them, especially in a place where students themselves are engaging and learning their students or their children, makes it more open to them. They feel that they could reach out more in case if they're students in need. They feel more open and more comfortable in actually communicating with the principal, with teachers. And so both parents and teachers in general should be held accountable for the students' needs in the classroom. A lot of times, parents might think that teachers are the ones responsible for a child's learning, a child's education, but that also falls upon the parents. So I believe both parties should be held responsible for a student's learning. And by creating collaboration and fostering that communication, there'll be more accountability held on both ends. And also, parents might also need support from the school. I don't think the school should just be for students. It should be for community. It should be for the parents. So schools some schools hold literacy programs for parents in the community, which definitely makes it more comfortable for parents to come. But also, parents don't see themselves as educators in general. By giving them access to these resources that schools offer, they can be seen not only as students to the school, but also as teachers. Like, they themselves will see themselves as teachers at the home. And so in general, with the community and the parents and the teachers, there should be a shared sense of purpose to educate the children. And so the school, I believe, should be open to everyone. So community organizers, parents, anybody who really wants to create collaboration within like student networking, I think it should be open for the school. And so in general, I think science learning is an intercultural process in which students and teachers negotiate the boundaries of race, culture, language, and subject matter in order to overcome traditional inequities that persist in science classrooms. And that is all.
Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is William Martin. And so when I decided to sort of engage in this project, I noticed one of the questions asked was sort of, how did Brown help you connect the dots? And so when I thought about connecting the dots, I knew that, you could say one dot is sort of where you are, another dot is where you're going. And so I really wanted to, at least with this presentation, I wanted to emphasize and really put focus on the line that does connect the dot, because I think that line is sort of what gives meaning to, why it is you're going where you're going and what it is you're doing. And so I think for me personally, with my Brown experience, I kind of identified that line through a lot of the work that I did in the Providence community. And so that's why I think that's kind of what I'm going to focus on. And so a lot of the stuff that I did in Providence And I just want to say, there are a lot of ways to get involved in the city of Providence, but a lot of my project is going to sort of like talk about just community service and involvement along that way. And so in the importance of Providence in your Brown education, I'm going to talk about sort of 3 key points. One is going to be the fluidity of being a teacher / a student. The next one is going to be the value of travel and traversing different spaces. And the last one is going to be sort of we are Providence. And so to get started with my first point of sort of fluidity of being a teacher and a student, how this really helps you in your Brown education, is sort of the idea that this fluidity leads to a sort of it spurs contagious professionalism. And so what I mean by that is that, when you are sort of like in a club and you have to become like a teacher, you have to sort of teach civics to a classroom, or you have to teach SAT prep or something of that sort, there is a type of authority, there's a type of responsibility that you take on. There's a type of, like I said before, responsibility with this goal where you want to be prepared, you want to be well-versed in the material, you want to come in and make sure that you do know and understand what it is you're going to be teaching to these students, and you want to be able to think deeply about it as well so you can anticipate questions. And so I think what that does is that does sort of have an effect when it comes to you as a student at Brown as well. So in my personal experiences, I realized that a lot of the preparation and work that I did to sort of be a good tutor or, be a good teacher in the classroom, I took those same kind of skills and applied them to being a student when I was at Brown. And so that meant that, I was prepared for classes. I did like the reading and the assignments ahead of time. I also, thought deeper and critically about the material in a way that sort of allowed me to kind of have questions for class as well. So I thought that was, pretty important. And then also I think this sort of professionalism, it allows me to sort of mirror what I want to be in a student. And so it does allow me to kind of become a better student because I see like, what it takes when you are kind of being a professional, and then I can like mold myself into that form. The second point that I like to talk about is sort of this insider-outsider access that you get in the classroom. And so by that, I mean you sort of know what's effective to students when you are both a teacher and a student as well. And so, that allows you to reach out with your students more because you kind of see, what works for me when I'm a student, and then what's also going to sort of work for them and try and seeing what works there. But then also I think this allows you to build better relationships with your professors when you are back on Brown's campus. And so if you are a teacher, you can kind of understand just sort of, what points it is that allow you to better connect with your students. And then you can kind of use what you learn from those points in order to better relate to your professors as well and really make the most efficient use of your time in like office hours and really get the most out of that relationship and the most out of that class. And then also I think what an insider-outsider access allows is for you to it allows me to sort of re-examine my habits and sort of critique myself critically. And so that way, if I'm a teacher, then that means I see myself as a student. I can critique myself as a teacher to myself as a student, but then I can also critique myself as a student to myself as a teacher. And so there is this sort of language of reciprocity that occurs there. And I think that is sort of important. And then last, what I think is important is sort of an appreciation. When you do take both sides, when you are a professor, when you are a teacher in the classroom and you're a student as well, you do kind of see the work that each side, each party has to put in order to make, education work. And that does allow for this appreciation, allows you to really understand each role. And so to give more to it and to really, foster this type of genuine care for what it is you're doing. And then so now I want to address sort of like one of the key points we have, which are power, borders, and identity. I want to address power. And so I think what sort of this fluidity of being a teacher and a student, what it adds to power is that it does allow for a type of empathy, right? Empathy is the ability to put yourself in the place of someone else. And I think, there's no better way for that to occur than kind of, taking on the role of both a teacher and taking on the roles of a student. You sort of acquire the eyes of a student, you acquire the eyes of a teacher, and then you kind of also learn about it strengthens your relationship with your students as well. An example is when I was a part of Let's Get Ready, which is a club that teaches SAT prep to high school students. I knew that my students, just from understanding them, they were into sort of like competition, they were into incentives, but then they also were a very close and tight-knit group. And so there was a sense of community that they valued as well. And so what I did was I sort of formed a lesson where I put them in teams, I gave them questions that sort of like tested SAT problems. And so they had to sort of like work together in order to get a prize, which would be some type of candy. And what I noticed was that, students, they were talking to each other, they were finding out, who was good at what skill, and then that person was taking sort of leadership, people were learning from each other. And so that just really did create a more sort of collaborative educational environment. And I feel like that's a type of environment that can only be created when you are able to understand, when you are able to put yourself in the shoes of the students and understand, what's the best way to sort of like, cultivate this curriculum to them and their interests and their virtues and what's best for them. And then lastly, at least along this point, is that I know there's, someone who's going to ask, William, this sounds great, but when it comes to this fluidity of being a teacher and a student, can I get these same lessons? Can I learn these same things from just being a TA at Brown, or maybe just sort of like tutoring someone at Brown? Aren't these lessons that I could learn here? And, I would say no, to be blunt, just because I feel like there is sort of importance, and I think there's a wisdom in being able to have conversations and relationships with people who are outside of your age bracket, and also people who are outside of sort of your station in life. And so I say station of life instead of just age bracket, because you could say that, a senior at Brown and a freshman at Brown is, the same in age to a freshman at Brown and a sophomore in high school, but they're in different stations in their life. You have a student who's trying to get through high school and someone who's trying to make the most out of their college experience. And so I think that when you do sort of unite people across these different stations, people who are sort of, at these different ages, there is a lot of value in these conversations. There are a lot of treasures that can be plucked from those conversations. And I think, it would behoove of, anyone on Brown's campus to try and go to Providence and get some of that wisdom, because it is ample and plentiful there. And then next, I want to address sort of the value of travel and traversing different spaces. So the first point I want to make is I think travel promotes a type of introspection. And so I think, I think back to my times on the RIPTA. I think about my times taking Uber to and from the different sites of the high schools or wherever I would be working in Providence. And I realized that what these sort of trips allowed is for a type of suspension of time. I had no control sort of over the bus. I had no control over the car. And so I was just kind of, sort of at the mercy of the moment. But I think that's a beautiful thing as well. Unfortunately, in the college, just when it comes to college, it feels like a lot of students have a sort of a relationship or a conception of time where all it is a series of deadlines. I have to declare my major in 2 years. I have to graduate in 4 years. This paper is due on this date. This assignment has to be done at this time. And I think what that does is that it kind of removes us from the present, and it creates a type of, it puts us in like this state of, it puts us in an anticipatory state where we're not really living in the moment. We're not really living in the present. And instead what we're doing is we're just always thinking and worrying about the next moment, what's going to happen 20 minutes later, what's going to happen 50 minutes later. And, that does kind of, I think that's dangerous in the sense that it does kind of lead to neglect. You no longer worry about yourself. You don't really pay attention to yourself. And so I think definitely these trips on the Uber, these trips on the RIPTA, they're great for a college student to just be able to take some time to really look at themselves and wonder, where are they, reflect about what they're doing. And I think there's just, I think that's a very healthy thing to sort of undergo. Next, I would like to talk about sort of how traveling and traversing these different spaces, it allows an appreciation of different spaces through relational understanding. And so what I mean by that is that in order to really maximize your Brown experience, you have to have this appreciation of Brown and just, how much it does have to offer. And I think that's something that you can do effectively when you are able to go off onto, Providence, and you're able to leave Brown in order to understand other spaces and other places as well. I think about times I spent with my students where they would ask me, oh, you go to Brown, how is it? they would say, oh, how do you get into Brown? And, they would really just be this glow in their eyes when they did talk about Brown. And I think what that does is it really reminds you that, you are it is very fortunate to be here, and there are a lot of opportunities, and you want to make the most out of those opportunities. You want to really take all that Brown has to offer. And I feel like that's something I'm not going to say you can only do by being a part of Providence, but it's something that you can definitely do more effectively, and you're probably more able to do when you're able to take a step outside of Brown. And then now I want to sort of bring this into the conversation of borders. And so I think that just, traversing different spaces, it does allow for a type of perspective, a broadening of your perspective. It allows for a type of humility. My favorite way to think about this is that, it does stop you from thinking that, you're the center of the universe. You can't really think that the world revolves around you if you have to cross a border. And so I think just it reminds you that you are part of a whole, and that, there is a whole entire community. You're a piece of the puzzle, and that it's important to sort of, recognize what your role is, and then being able to be the best that you can in that role. And then last, what I think makes this unique is that it does sort of, it widens the radius of your impact, in the sense that your mind, when you think about different clubs, when you think about different activities you can do at Brown, what being a part of Providence does is it allows you to say that, hey, this assignment, this sort of club I want to create, this idea I have, it can travel beyond Brown. It can, affect people in Providence. It can incorporate aspects of Providence. So there is this expansion of innovation that occurs. You think, maybe I can do this with the Providence community, maybe Rhode Island, maybe for this club, instead of just having students from Brown, I can have students from Providence College as well. And so I think it really does allow you to sort of, do more with your ideas and make more out of them. And then the last thing I like to talk about is sort of we are Providence. And what I mean by that is that sort of becoming a Brown student and a Providence community member, it does sort of make you more complex as a human being. I think it allows you to sort of relate to a wider range of people. And then it also sort of enriches the college experience, and it allows you to tell a more colorful story as well. So, all of your stories and all of your tales from your college experience won't just be about what you did on the Hill, but they'll be about, the travel, the people you met, and, a lot of other things as well. So there's a lot of growth in those moments that, a lot of people could benefit a lot from. Then I would say, shaking hands would be the next thing that's important. And shaking hands is really just meant to represent the human interactions of just meeting people, the smiles, the hugs, and just sort of like really getting to meet people within the community. I think back to a time last semester when I took the RIPTA twice in one day, because I did the Swear a Classroom program in the morning, but I did the Brown Esau program at night. And what happened was I sort of met the same guy twice on the RIPTA. I met the same guy twice waiting for the RIPTA. And when I saw him again the second time, he kind of asked me, I saw you before. And I told him, I'm just, doing some community work. And, it was he sort of said how, it's great what you're doing. And so like that sort of affirmation, that's sort of like really finding out from someone firsthand in the community, hey, I appreciate what you're doing. It's great that you're here. I think that is something precious, and it's something important to have. And then last, when it comes to identity, I would really say about identity is it's sort of, what will be the magnitude of your best foot? People always say put your best foot forward, but how much of an impact do you want that foot to have? And I think that is a question that gets answered through your time in Providence, through your time in the community, because you really are able to answer the critical questions like, how much do I believe as a person I can do? And then how much am I comfortable doing just, as one person, or just even in my life in itself? And so I think that does allow for a type of assurance in your obligation to the world. I think what it does is allow you to say, I feel comfortable working with, these groups of people. I feel comfortable maybe just in an assistant role as opposed to in a leadership role. And I think, those are answers that if you have them about yourself, it does sort of define who you are, that is identity, and that does allow you to sort of be more successful when you do move beyond Brown. And the last point I want to make about what makes it unique, the Providence, is simply the idea that, Brown is a home away from home. But if you have the opportunity to sort of expand your home, why not take that opportunity? Imagine if you can make your home not just Brown, but Providence as well. I think that's great in terms of, there are people who are homesick sometimes, people who feel like they don't belong, people who feel sort of trapped in this environment, who have nostalgia, who wish, they could return home. And so I think what being able to not just, make Brown your home, but make Providence your home too, is that it does kind of give you more opportunities to sort of recreate your home, figure out, what are the spots you like. There are more spots if you think about Providence and Brown as opposed to just Brown. Leisure places, places to, get your hair done, possibly places to sort of study. These are all things that you can discover just kind of being in Providence. And it does allow you to sort of recreate a space for yourself that you can really call your own while you are away from home. And I think that's important. And so that is everything. Those are just, I think those are just some important things that, people can sort of gain from just making Providence a part of their Brown education.
Really wonderful. These are great presentations, you guys.
Hi everyone, my name is Gwen, and I am happy to be speaking to you today. So I'll be talking about a social business venture that I founded and I've spent just half my time, I guess, at Brown working on this. And I'll talk about how it began, and also how it ties into a wider global problem that in education, essentially. All right. Oh, it's missing something. All right, so my freshman summer, I spent about 2 months in Murewa, which is a rural part of Zimbabwe, working with girls around the ages of 14, between the ages of 14 and 16. And they were all enrolled in a high school called Magaya High. And my partner on the project I was working on is from Nigeria. And so she could only communicate with the girls in English, which shouldn't have been a problem because for the past 50 or so years, English has been called the lingua franca of Zimbabwe. And based on that assumption, examinations are conducted in English, schools are, and lessons are implemented in English. And yet here were these girls, and most of them who were only a few months away from writing very important national exams, and they could barely understand, let alone communicate in English. And it would take me a few months of research to figure out why this was the case. It turns out that about 70% of Zimbabwean children who enter a first grade classroom speak one of the 15 indigenous languages that are spoken in Zimbabwe, and they speak those at home, and not English. And yet they were immediately expected to start learning how to read and write in a language they have never heard, spoken, or seen before. In fact, the transition to reading and writing in English is almost impossible because their only interaction with the language is in the classroom. And so when they go home, their parents don't speak English, and so they can't reinforce the ideas that they're learning. And it's not just their literacy, so their ability to read and write that's impacted, but all the other subjects, mathematics, science, geography, all depend on a good working knowledge of English. And so guided by a lot of research that shows that a good literacy grounding in the mother tongue facilitates easier learning in any additional languages, Zimbabwe recently instituted an education policy change, and all early grades will now be taught in the language common to the different linguistic regions. And the problem the government now faces is where to source the books in indigenous languages, because where previously they only had to source books in English, they now have to make sure that every child is catered for and has a fair chance. And that's sort of where the idea for the publishing company that I started comes from. And Toreva Publishers aims to create, print, and distribute children's storybooks for children between the ages of 4 and 7 in all of Zimbabwe's 16 languages. So that's including English as well. As opposed to the players currently publishing books in that space, we are offering books that have a strong entertainment merit. And so we realize that children learn really well when they're not just being told, this is an apple, but sort of have a story that they can relate to that is fun and engaging. So we're offering that in addition to the books actually impacting educational outcomes. And what we're offering is a solution that allows all children a fair chance at a good education, something which will mean better economic prospects for them on an individual level, but also will mean, hopefully, better outcomes for the country in general. And we're also helping preserve indigenous languages of Zimbabwe. And this last point is something that I'd really like to stress, because I think it's important that at this point in time, we're challenging the assumption that English equals education. And that has been the assumption in Zimbabwe, and I think globally as well, that's spreading, that you cannot learn unless you're learning in English, and your ability to speak English communicates your intelligence. And I'm excited to think of a generation that grows up without that mindset. I'll talk a little bit about the business plan. I'm missing one half of my slide, bear with me. But essentially, we're hoping to sell books, of course, to the Ministry of Education in Zimbabwe, because they have the widest reach. They can help us reach all the schools in the country. And so this summer, we will be piloting our first title, which is called Greedy Gari in English, or Gari Chikomane Chimakaro in Shona. And we'll be gathering information on how those books help impact children's learning outcomes. And hopefully the results will be positive. And at the same time, we'd like to spend the summer working on exploring the viability of a market here in the US, because there are about 6 million Zimbabweans who live outside the country. And that's a pretty big number, and often parents struggle with how to help children retain a link to their culture or their heritage, especially when they're in a foreign country, like I am right now. And so from conversations that I've had with parents, they've expressed an interest in that. But beyond that, I'd also like the books that we produce to be read by people who don't necessarily identify as Zimbabwean. Because growing up, I read widely. I read a lot of books that featured people living in the US, because I was living in Zimbabwe at that point, but people living in Finland, people living in the UK. And what that did for me is it allowed me, one, to dream bigger than my immediate space, but it also taught me a lot of empathy to deal with people, on how to just embrace people who are different from, and may have experienced things that are very different from what I've experienced. And I think that's something that is currently missing in the literature that is offered in the US, and you'll see that with the We Need Diverse Books campaign. And so I really like to contribute to that. And I've mostly talked about Zimbabwe and Zimbabwean books so far, because that's what I've spent most of my time researching and working on. But hopefully what Toreva will do is either motivate other people to create similar publishing houses or movements in places around the country, around the world. Oh, there's the other slide. Oh, okay. So I'm missing some text on this, but about 2.8 billion people around the world still lack access to instruction in a language that they speak or understand. So that's 40% of the world's population. And so what I'm hoping this does is encourages people, should this gain any traction, encourages people to really address this problem. And keep in mind that beyond the need for diversity that is skin deep, so beyond needing characters that represent us physically, we also need books that represent our different linguistic backgrounds. All right. So the last thing I'll talk about is how initially when I thought of diversity in publishing, the biggest problem that I had with the books that I'd read, so I was coming from my own experience, and the biggest problems that I'd had with books that I'd read is that they didn't represent characters who looked like me on a physical level. And that affected me in a way, and the way that I thought of myself, and affected part of my identity formation. And for a very long time, I thought I really wanted to have long, straight hair, and possibly fairer skin. And I think that came from not seeing people who looked like me in the books that I read, and being validated that that people like me deserved to be in books as well. But I think being at Brown and realizing that I was also privileged coming from where I was coming from, the fact that I had books to begin with that I could read, one, because my mother could speak English and I was brought up speaking both English and Shona, that gave me a huge advantage that most people who don't speak English don't even have. And so my dream is to take my Brown experience and make what was a privilege for me, hopefully a reality for every child out there. Thank you.
Let's begin with the floor coming open for questions you may have, things that you thought you understood, or perhaps you'd like clarification from our panelists. I want to say personally, just congratulations, this wonderful content to think about, and I think disrupted classrooms and new materials for learning and rip-to-passes lead us in many metaphoric directions as well as literal ones. So I wish my science teaching in my public school in Philadelphia had been a bit more culturally competent. I think I might have been a better scientist. I know I would have been. So questions from the floor? Things you'd like to know more? Please.
Thank you all for speaking. This is all really good. I have a specific question for Gwen. I was wondering, so you said the Greedy Gary book is going to be in Shona in English. Are you also looking to put that in the other, 14 other languages? And if so, what are the challenges around assembling a team that can translate those books?
Yeah, that is a very good question. So the only reason why, I don't know if you can all hear me? Oh, it's a little better. So the only reason why we're starting with Shona is, one, because the majority of Zimbabwean population does speak Shona, but and so it makes it easier to pilot our books and see widely how people respond to them. But I think then we run the risk of doing the same thing that English is doing and just prioritizing one language above all others. And so the dream is that if everything goes well this summer, we'll be able to apply for funding that would enable us to print books in the other languages that do have a smaller population, but those populations deserve the same as everybody else. Yeah. Other questions?
So I have a couple for you. You might guess. So I was thinking particularly, William, as you were talking about time. People who work in the fields I work in are always thinking about time. And you might not know this about Brown, and I think in the discipline of sociology, we try not to say this too loudly, but institutions of higher education are usually characterized as greedy institutions. And what I mean by that when we're talking about time is that literally we break all the rules and we make up a whole new set. So you began learning these as soon as you learned how to find your courses by numbers and things that don't correlate to anything outside Brown. When in the world would you ever be expected to turn something in by midnight? Or work on it on a weekend or something else. But these are things that we just get to think of as normal. TA sessions that happen in ridiculous locations, resourced in all kinds of ways, and greedy institutions just break all the rules and make new ones. And we, of course, argue that this is urgent, that we do this because we have such a short time with you. That's our argument. So I wondered if each of you would think a little bit out loud about time. I loved you started us down a lovely path of saying like, okay, so I'm waiting for the RIP to bus and I can't hurry that. I actually have to take whatever time it's going to take to get between my worlds. And yet the world you're entering with your student, right, on the other end has a kind of greedy quality too, because there's only that many hours to do the basketball. If you're doing sports or if you're doing tutoring or whatever you're doing, often those windows are very small and have to be chosen out of things that families can navigate or schools can offer or community agencies have available. So I found myself thinking a lot about science teaching. Frankly, I think the science teacher that's out there thinks, gosh, I've got to teach this student all this vocabulary. But as you say, if it's not culturally accessible, if you're a child I can't even imagine being thrown into a school where I've never heard the language before and being expected to excel in that. So where is the time needed to make those translations? What are you thinking about now from the work that you've been doing about how to either make everybody take RIPTA? I mean, that's an interesting idea. How do we slow people down enough to actually do the work that you're talking about? Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you shouldn't slow them down. I think all of you need to talk about this. It's really interesting.
Anybody want to go first?
Yeah, so I'll start it off. So I think to answer that question, I think it's the idea that time's not going to change. There's always going to be sort of 60 seconds in a minute, 24 hours in a day, right? So that's something we're kind of powerless against. But I think what we do have the power to change is our relationship to time. And that kind of starts with our conceptualization of time. And so if we see time as something that's greedy, then there is going to be sort of, this negative effect and relationship we have with time. But instead, if we can sort of transform our relationships with time as sort of, time being something that heals, time being something that rejuvenates, time being something that extends and lends longevity towards, then I think we can begin to sort of, appreciate the time that we have and make more of it. In the sense that it's not always going to seem like we're racing against the clock, we're racing against time, we're trying to meet a deadline, but instead we sort of value the sort of, we value the amount of time we have to get something done, the amount of time we have to sort of, learn a lesson or get an assignment done. And so I think, I think a lot of it is definitely getting people to slow down, but getting people to understand, what race are they running, and what exactly is the incentive in getting to that finish line. Sort of like slowing people down enough to ask them, do you even remember what you're running for? And so if you can keep that kind of goal in your head, I do think that does sort of lead you to value your time and probably make better use of your time than you do under the deadline system.
Going off of that, I actually want to bring up a point that you said about the conception of time, like due to deadlines, especially when we're college, like deadlines kind of keep us on track on what's next in life. But I think in general, time is relative for everybody, and I think everybody needs a certain amount of time to do certain things, and it varies for each person. So even when doing like teaching, I think certain things takes a little bit longer to process because everybody does learn in a different way, and it doesn't mean that they learn any less efficiently or it's any better than the other. But in general, I think time is very personalized, and I think it should be in teaching and an education system. And to take it, I think you're right. I think you should take advantage of time. And efficiency does not always mean like, oh, who's the fastest to win the race. At times, efficiency takes a long time because you're processing things and you end up learning and grasping things better, which is better for the long run. When you take a class and you're just like, you're not really listening and then you're cramming, like I do, I cram. But I don't keep it, I don't retain it, right? That's not efficient. It's fast, right? Because I'm working on the clock. But it's not efficient. I'm not learning these things. So I think it's actually better to slow down, really grasp, because in the long run, you're saving so much time. And you're saving a lot of a lot of pain for yourself, a lot of destruction, because a lot of times you hurt yourself. You weigh yourself down when you're trying to, go against the clock. So I think it's really important to just realize it's very personalized and it's not something that we all do live by time, but in a different way. So yeah, just everybody needs to take time.
So yeah, I think within the context of Brown, where, as everybody else has said, you always have deadlines to meet, it's often very hard to think of how you can continue doing the things that you are passionate about while still being able to have friends who you hang out with, or participate in other things that you might want to participate in. And I think part of that, or part of what I've learned over the past 2 years is it's okay for me not to view the work that I'm doing as a checklist that has to be completed by the time that I graduate, and keeping in mind that the change that I'm hoping to see is not going to be achieved in the 4 years that I'm here, and that beyond Brown, I still have a chance to keep working on this. Yeah, I don't know if that.
Michelle, I was especially thinking when you were talking about the lounge or area for parents, right? I'm not sure if any of you have a similar memory to me, but it always feels to me like school is about the business of being, forgive me for saying this, but late, right? Late leaving home, the bus is late, the kids are all late to class. I taught secondary school for a long time. The bell would ring and everybody scrambled. It was always like the idea of offering a lounge for parents. I'm just stunned by that idea because it's so smart, right? I mean, if in fact a school could be a gathering place, then this question of who's late and who's early actually changes. Maybe there's actually a cup of coffee to share, as parents maybe share ideas about how their children are doing in the school, or even just become friends. I could help drive your kid to school and you wouldn't have to be late for work all the time. I mean, there's the notion of late is an idea that I just attach to time all the time because it feels like there's never a way to actually get everything in that should fit there. So William, to your point, how do you make time, in a sense, be your friend, work for you, take a different sense of time? I'm thinking of those teachers in Zimbabwe, looking out at those tiny little children that are arriving who don't, I'm your teacher, you don't understand a thing I've said, perhaps, because no one speaks English at home, right? What is that like to be that teacher? It must be awful. I mean, I can't believe that it's just monstrous people teaching little children. So I'm thinking, my God, why does that problem stay there? It feels like it's so important to do what you're proposing to do with your books, but also it feels so overdue. It feels so late to be coming to this idea when the suffering for these kids, and how many children have not succeeded in school because of that. So I guess I'm wondering if you think we're late or early in things we're doing here at Brown, in things that, and what, as you look out, I love the fact, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like I heard all of you talking about work that actually isn't contained by curriculum here. It might have started in that and started in service work and others, but is way now outside of that and has become, chaplains talk this way, some kind of a calling, some kind of a direction for your life, which really is exciting for me to hear. but are we late or early to those callings work? How are you seeing it carrying you beyond these gates? I mean, it already has got William on the bus, so I'm happy. I love, you all were talking about travel. I mean, literally places you've come from, but also places we need to go. Thoughts?
I mean, we're definitely late.
Yeah, I was like, we're late.
I think that there are a lot of ways in which our society has been shaped that privilege others above others, and that simply has meant that generations of people have been skipped by things that they, and I don't want to use the word deserve, because nobody really deserves anything they get, but things that they shouldn't have had to miss because they had no control over them.
Right to it, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I
not
think that's a
deserve, but
good.
I think it's
a right. A right. And so I think we're definitely late to a lot of things, which can make thinking about this a little hard and difficult to think of how do you catch a bus that's already moving. Or is there another bus coming that we can put everybody else on? And is that bus, have we, I guess, changed it in its capacity of how many people it's able to hold before it leaves? Yeah.
Yeah, I think to answer that question, I'm not sure how much I like the idea of like late or early. I think as long as you sort of reach the destination, that is kind of what matters. And so to kind of answer your question about how do we make like time our friend, I think you do have to sort of incorporate other people as well. And so what that means is that if there is hypothetically, or metaphorically, this bus, it's not a one-way bus. People can always come back. And I think that's kind of the key, to have individuals, much like Michelle and much like Gwen, who have been able to look reflexively on their opportunities and are able to articulate, the things they wish they would have learned, and then to be able to use that to give opportunity, which you could also say is just, more time to people who have not had it. And so I think if we can kind of, and this is what I mean when I say it's a part of like reconceptualizing how we see time, if we can also not just see time as deadlines, but we can also go away from thinking of time as something finite and absolute, but we can think about time as something that is a little more, elastic, in the sense that we can take it, we can share it, we can like borrow it for a while. If we can think of time, in that way, then I think there is no sort of sense of someone being late or someone early, because there's always the possibility that there's going to be someone else to sort of, bring you along, or you can always go back and probably engage in things that you didn't before. So I think a lot of it is just like changing our relationships to time altogether.
And going off of that, I really agree. And I also think in terms of like interpreting history, I think history tends to not repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes. So definitely, I think time is a very circular kind of, it's on a circular momentum. So I believe we're late, but we're not late. Like, it's like contradictory, but in general, I think we need to keep moving forward, but being okay with also taking a step backwards to see how far we've gone. So really just taking time as much as possible and really utilizing it in a way that we're all moving together. And sometimes, this is a really conceptual question. I'm like lost in I'm lost in space and time right now. It's so much.
You're supposed to be.
But I just think time is really relative. So it's really hard to say we're late or early, because it is different for every person. So like I said before, it's really personalized. So it's really hard to say when, like, what time is, because we don't even have a good definition for time. Like, how do you define time? Like, there's not even a good way to just, like, what's the definition? Like, there's no way. We associate with what we're familiar with how, like, right now as time passes, that's time, but it's really hard to describe, I think. But but I still think we need progress. So I'm more inclining to that we're late than we're early, but we're still like in the middle because we still have so much progress to do. So like representation in books and all these different things and teaching and how curriculum is addressed, all these different things, definitely it needs time to grow. So it definitely needs time. I don't know how much time, but it needs it.
Please.
Yeah, there's a question I'd like to ask, and I like that we've been talking about time, and because it really seems like one of those monoliths that nobody can escape because we all somehow have to grapple with this. Another thing that really seems like a monolith to me, at least here in the United States, is the system of education. And one of the topics that you all have been talking about is how can we kind of grapple with the monolith of education. And we've all been through some sort of educational system, the vast majority of people in the United States have. But at the same time, we recognize that there's been long problems that seem to not go away. And I think you all have brought in some really great ideas and really great points about ways we can address some of these problems and ways we can be reflective and introspective about these things, and even just being in the spaces and for example, like going to communities and being with the students, as well as like the idea of incorporating parents into the education. Now I'm kind of losing where I wanted the question to go, but I think my question is how do we get more of that, more people being reflective about education, more people being introspective and being involved and wanting to contribute?
So I think in terms of getting more people part of the conversation, I think it's also like inviting them to the conversation. So in general, schools can be really inaccessible because a lot of times parents or in general communities have a very bad experience going into the education system, or they didn't finish, or there's a bunch of different scenarios, especially if you go into an education system that's outside the United States and you're coming here. It is definitely a different experience in learning, and there's also a language barrier. So I think in terms of making people in general more effective of education is inviting those who may not necessarily have the same opportunities as those who are more privileged, such as schools having these opportunities for literacy programs for people in their community, like schools actually being reflective of their community, not really just catering to the community that is idealized in the United States, but catering to the community they're in. Like that should be the main focus. Like that's the whole purpose of schools doing demographics of their surroundings, and those communities are also contributing to the school. They provide resources just as schools should provide resources to them, because when people are paying for the housing, all these different things, taxes goes into the school, so they should definitely be provided with resources for the community. So it's not just like, so it's inviting them to these schools, but it's also making them have more access to like diverse perspectives. So like how you were saying, like you read books that were from outside of Zimbabwe, and then you also would like to read representation of Zimbabwe. So you want to read like a diverse set of books, like everything. You want to have like a whole spectrum that to be access to, because from that you gain empathy as well. So I think in terms of being like reflective, having people be reflective of education is not only to provide resource to those who might not have access to education, but to also demonstrate like share the experiences of those with everybody. So it's really just having kind of like an exchange, a culture exchange among everybody. And I think through that you'll reflect, because you'll see there's so much inequity. Like people don't know what they don't know. So that's the whole point, like to really make sure they're aware of it, because a lot of people they're oblivious to what's going on in the education system, and they think if you come from a private institution or a private school that it's great, right? Because you don't know anything else. You didn't go through a public high school. You don't know how many resources are lacking. Like the arts doesn't exist in a lot of public schools. So I think it's like really reading about it, being exposed to people that have these experiences, and having schools engage with the communities they're in.
Yeah, I think to answer that question, I think experience is kind of the key word here. As Michelle kind of touched on before, it does seem like a lot of people, they don't exactly have the most favorable recollection of school or their experiences in like academic settings. And so what that does is that does kind of that does sort of hinder them from wanting to sort of like be involved in schools and in education, because there is this idea of why would I want to kind of return to a place that kind of harmed me or didn't really do the best for me. So I think a lot of it is, it's sort of like two-pronged. So I would say first is for the young people, for the people who are either matriculating into school or the people who are still in school, there has to be an emphasis, there has to sort of be this desire to get people to sort of like improve their experiences with education while they're still kind of involved with it. And so whether that is through the means of getting better, sort of getting teachers to sort of like improve their relationships with them, giving more opportunities with the classroom. I think a lot of this is just sort of what Gwen and what Michelle talked about when they talked about sort of the idea of teaching different languages, and then also the idea of like culture in the classroom, because I do think that's huge, the idea of culture, because I think that does sort of cater to the individual. And so what that does is it does make the classroom, it does make the space of education more meaningful. It makes you care about it because you do associate with a part of yourself with the education. And so of course you're going to care about, something that you can kind of relate to yourself. So I think that's important. And then also for the people who have had these kind of bad and poor experiences with education, I think you can't think of them as sort of like a sunken cost, but instead we do have to bring them into the conversation as well. And I think you do a lot of that by helping them sort of reimagine their experiences. Mm-hmm. And so instead of always focusing on sort of like, the one teacher who told you weren't going to be anything, or thinking about, a bad encounter in the lunchroom, you do try to get people to focus on, what were some of the good moments, what were things that you did enjoy, and then you dig deeper once you find those moments. You try to pull out, what were the aspects of those moments, what were the attributes of those moments, and you try to reproduce that in the present. And I think that's a good way to get people to, one, kind of have a fonder imagination or a fonder recollection of their experiences in school, but then also to sort of encourage them to want to be more involved and to want to, think about these moments that were great for them and make them great for other people as well.
So sort of going off of that, I do think that educators do have a very big role to play in how we think about this. And I say this because I don't think I was thinking this way when I first got to Brown about my own experiences and about other people's experiences. And it's actually, in my first year, I took a class with Professor Dzidzienyo in the Africana department, and he had us to read a book by Ralph Michel Trio, which is called Silencing the Past. And that book had me thinking a lot about how narratives, one, are constructed, but also how it's important for us to constantly question the narratives we've been told. And I think that changed a lot of how I thought of my Brown career. And so without people who were guiding me to think a lot more critically about my experiences, I wouldn't have been able to, I probably wouldn't be here. And at the same time, I think that you can, as somebody who goes through Brown, you can still think critically about these things and decide not to do anything about it. And not to say that either way is better. People have different passions in life, and it's okay to follow whatever those passions are. But when you do think that, I think personally, I feel compelled to use stories to help people think differently about the world. And so whether that's in video work or through books, that's sort of how I think I can make a difference.
I don't want to bypass any questions from the audience. I have one, maybe I'll just make it one last one. So you've sunk yourself deep in this work, each of you differently. I wonder what instructions you'd give this great university that sits here today, very, very proud of you and what you've accomplished, that might guide our work better. What is there a narrative about Brown that you knew before you came, for instance? I'm just using this as an example from your last beautiful point of narratives we have to both know, but also critique, and in some cases maybe empower people to tell a totally different story of something. I think of that, this is a teeny story of my own. A few years ago, one of the graduate school deans was unavailable to take graduate students as part of their orientation. Janet, would you please take them there to go to supper? I said, where are we meeting? She said, at the gate. I went to the gate. Up walked the graduate students, all from different places in the world, and I said, come on, and we started walking down the hill. Right? They looked at me like I was taking them to just somewhere really far, right? We went across the, I don't even know the names of these streets, Canal Street, I guess it is, at the bottom, over the bridge, and we went to a little restaurant, which if you haven't been there, called the Red Fez. I recommend it. It's quite reasonable if you're a graduate student. You can actually afford to eat there. You can get a decent beer. It's kind of a fun place. And honestly, several of the older continuing students said, I didn't know this was here. We were back up the hill. I mean, you might say it's like 2 blocks away, maybe 3. William, as you were talking earlier today, I was finding myself thinking, I wonder if Brown students even say of their time at Brown, graduate or undergraduate, that they were in Providence. Or do they say, I was at Brown? I'm very interested in language, so I think it matters a lot how people tell these stories. But do you say I lived in Providence for 4 years, or do you say I was at Brown for 4 years? Because I think in the case of those graduate students, most of whom were new, but some were returning, they just didn't even think about. And I was saying to them, like, gosh, this city has fabulous food, and there's a lot of really inexpensive places to eat that are just delicious. And I'm not saying the Hill doesn't have good food. It does, but you get kind of tired of it. At the school I went to, in Philadelphia, I actually think, Michelle, we need you to go work there. Because I truly don't think today, I mean, I stay in touch with some of the teachers who frankly saved my life, but they're still kind of urgently running against the current of that school, which is like pretty much the way it was before. It's pretty hard bitten. We had lousy books. When I got to college, it turned out the kids across the lab table had had at least 2 years more chemistry than I had. And I didn't know that. I was a smart girl in my school, but not very well prepared for university. So I guess I wonder what advice you'd give us. What shifts in the narrative would you suggest? Be our teachers for a minute as Brown and help us to think about what our next work is, even as you get ready to step through the gates.
Yeah, I think I'll answer this question first.
I'm eager for your answers.
Address the question first. Well, I mean, it's times like this I wish the word education had an F in it. So then you could say if you take out you could then say, oh, we could put the fun back in education.
I see.
It's already a O and there's already an N and a U. But along that same lines of fun, I think advice I would give so I guess some of the professors is that I think there are times where it does seem like there is kind of a disconnect with the students when it comes to like grasping the material, simply because you have someone who is a professional, someone who's an academic, someone who is so well versed in the material that it can kind of seem like, to use an analogy, you're getting a mathematician to kind of teach basic arithmetic to a kindergartner, and then it just kind of, it's like no one can really teach anyone anything, or no one can learn anything. And so like the advice I would give, and I like this advice because I think it does tie in with the getting involved with Providence as well. I would advise a lot of professors to kind of become a student again. And by that I mean, find a class in something that you aren't exactly such an expert in, whether that's painting, whether that's sculpting, whether that is sort of learning about a different type of music, but just find a way to make yourself a student again. Put yourself in the place of just being someone who's like just ignorant to a field, and kind of rediscover that passion, rediscover that sort of that experience of kind of like figuring things out and having these eureka moments. And just I feel like a lot of that will sort of like it'll open up some of the old sort of memories in your own mind of whatever it is, whatever sort of discipline that you're teaching, and it'll sort of like remind you exactly why you're doing this, why you're involved, why this is enjoyable for you. And then I think when you feel that way, you kind of can relate that back to the students, there is this empathy, as we talked about before. And so I think that just kind of improves the entire morale of the classroom and the entire sort of, proficiency of what can get done and what can get accomplished in the classroom. So I think, that's very important to sort of return yourself to that state of just being a student and just trying to, use that as a way to just rediscover yourself.
That's wonderful advice.
Going off of that, I think it's great in terms of like student-teacher kind of balance, so they can go back and forth and do a switch. I also wanted to emphasize, I think the professors here, we're going off like what Brown should do, right? I think they should start to get to know the community more in general, like not only the Brown community, but also the Providence community, because I think it should be more accessible to also just the Providence community, because I think schools definitely need to address not just the students here, but the people that make up the community. And so I think in terms of curriculum for professors, I think for a lot of times I noticed that the content they give out or the books they make us read is not very diverse. It's not a diverse selection. So I think making sure they're aware to have different perspectives addressed when they're giving out like readings for class or anything. Also in their lectures to incorporate different perspectives, not just their own, because could be very narrow-minded and can lead to very dangerous paths and create misconceptions and assumptions. I also think it's important for the school itself to encourage us to critique the curriculum, like actually encourage us to analyze what is being taught and kind of being okay with like having us in a way like make it our own, because a lot of times I think we're just given the content and we just have to learn it, but we're never actually given agency of our own future. Sometimes like here we could make our own courses, but in any other class you can't do that. So I think even within the classes we're taught, especially like science or anything, I think to give us the agency to see what representation like we have, but also like diverse perspectives, and for us to be able to also but tell professors like, I don't really think this is appropriate, like to make it more open. So it's because a lot of times some teachers do put stuff out there that is really inappropriate for the students in a classroom, and I think there should be a discussion between teachers and professors and students where it doesn't feel like teachers have so much power over us, where we feel like we can't say anything. I think there should be more of a mutual understanding that we're here to help each other, and that I'm learning from you and you're learning from me. This is like a path, this is like an exchange. This is not you're teaching at me. And that goes in with how teachers teach. Most of the teachers here, especially in science classes that I'm in, it's lecture style. Like you're talking at me, and I feel like I'm not really grasping a lot, and then the pace is very quick. And a lot of times students need to like take a pause, and that's not really granted in a classroom discussion, although we do have like lecture capture that helps with that. But in the classroom, in the actual classroom, the only kind of method that is used is lecture. And I think there should be more there should be more exchange of knowledge within the students themselves, because I feel like I learn more when students ask the professor questions and the professor answers than from the professor themselves sometimes. Like I learn more from the students and how they're learning it, because we're in the same level right now. We're both trying to grasp this material, while the teacher themselves may not have been a student for a long time, which I think is the importance for them revisiting and reimagining what it was like to be in school. And I think the last thing is that I think it's important for the department, for the professors, everybody in this school to know the school's history. Like the school's history, if you don't know the past, it's like frozen memories that are just like, they're just stagnant there, and they kind of influence how we're being taught today. Like open curriculum was a part of history, and I think we all need to be aware of the history and the oppression that the school has also done to a lot of communities in Providence, and how that has impacted us, and how that makes us aware of our privilege. Like I think everybody in this school needs to be more aware of this school's history, because it influences like the teaching.
Excellent.
So I think that a point that William mentioned in his presentation that I really liked, that resonated with me, is the idea that crossing borders allows you to see that you're not the world, that there are other pieces to the puzzle. And I think that's really important, because being an international student here at Brown, I think that not a lot of professors tend to think beyond the US. and in the way that they assign books that we read. And that keeps repeating the cycle that we are already in, where we privilege certain narratives over others. And I think that's something that Brown should continue to work on seriously. And lastly, I would say that thinking of it on a broader scale, one thing that bothers me about how we speak about ourselves as Brown students and how Brown speaks about us as students is this idea that you're here because you deserve to be. And I think everybody has worked hard to be here. That's not anything I doubt, but I think we need to question more and constantly whether we're here and we deserve to be here more than anybody else, or whether it's the experiences that we've had that lead us to the point where we can come to Brown. And I think Brown tries to challenge that, and we are pushed in many ways to be critical of our own privilege, but in many ways we still repeat that narrative of, if you're a Brown student, you're here because you deserve to be here. Yeah. Thank you.
I think I probably speak for everybody in the room that says, I know I didn't deserve to be here today, and I'm really glad I was. I learned a lot, and I loved listening to the interplay of the ideas that each of you brought to the table, both the distinct content, but the ways the ideas sort of ricocheted off each other. I expect you'll all be thinking about that. I know I will be, and I expect the audience will be as well. So I invite you to, first off, congratulate these folks. But I want to say one more thing, which is we're going to keep listening. I mean, I really hope that you will continue to do what you're doing and that you'll somehow find ways to tell us what that is, whether we'll read new storybooks to children in languages we don't even know yet, which I hope we can learn. I'm definitely going to ride the bus differently. And I'm thinking back to my secondary school teaching days. I'm wishing you had been in the classroom next door so we could have traded ideas about how better to get the students engaged. And frankly, you may not know this, but it's probably 10 years ago we realized that the most constant source of advice for a Brown student about their education came from, do you want to guess? Who is it you talk to most about your studies? Parents. So your point about the fact that the child learns at home, then the child comes to school, and do we continue to honor both of those places and to think about that third space? It turned out that we really needed to put buttons on all of our web pages for family. So that in fact, if you were calling and speaking to your mother about, gosh, I hate this class, or I can't, that your mom would actually have some idea of how we go about thinking that way. I would not say we've perfectly done that at all, but just the concept came to us actually from asking our students, like, who do you talk to most about your schoolwork? And it turned out people with cell phones were calling home all the time, sending text messages going, oh, shouldn't have ever taken this class, or this faculty member doesn't like me, or I'm not ready. And, how can a family member help you if we haven't thought to make available to them ways that they could read the catalog or read, and I have to say, in my case, no one in my family went to college before we did, so that would have been a little harder to read that, but they're very smart people. So I think that business of asking, where do you put the information so it's really accessible, and so people's ability to influence the learning of the student who's here, I think we started using that language about who deserves to be here because people like me, when we arrived at college, thought we didn't deserve to be in school. We thought other people were smarter than we were and had more of a right. But I do think that listening to the words again might not be the right words. The political meaning at the time was important, but it's been a while we've been using those words, and I'm not so sure it doesn't have a very different meaning now. And one that actually, hearing you say it, makes me uncomfortable. I'm thinking, I feel like I'm blessed to breathe in the morning, so it's not that I deserve it. It's like, why ever I'm breathing, may it be good for you, and could we be good for each other? And you all have given us a lot of good today, so thank you very much, and thank you for the work that brought you to this table and for volunteering to speak in the Theories in Action conference. It's really important. Thank you all for coming, too. It's wonderful to have an audience.